Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and we're testing out a slightly improved technical version of the show, so please bear with us. I am actually hearing an echo of what I say. Edifying though this is, probably not the best setup. But now let's look at this panorama of world breakdown crisis, chaos across the world, the dangers of war. This is the darkling plain swept by confused alarms where ignorant armies clash by night. It all grows out of the 2008 world economic depression, the world derivatives panic unleashed by Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and the entirety of the zombie banks. But it's now complicated by the universal destabilization launched by the Anglo-Americans, the CIA, MI6, all the rest, DGSE, BND, declaring war on the nation state and attempting to balkanize the world, to smash every existing nation and reduce it to some petty, squabbling principality, impotent in the face of ExxonMobil, J.P. Morgan Chase, and so forth. So we're very far down the line. And we've got some interesting developments, and I urge people not to simply lapse into sloganeering. I've been watching somehow the Workers' World Party and their various spin-offs, the Answer Coalition, Youth Against War and Fascism. They seem to exercise a preponderant influence in the international cable news coming from the United States. And naturally, these are your Stalinists of 1956. So it's good to hear from them, but we'd like to hear from somebody else, too. And naturally, whenever the U.S. does anything, they're the first ones to condemn it, which much of the time is going to be okay, but maybe not all the time. And here's the complication. The imperialist policy runs into these kinds of contradictions. You have to imagine a crazy, an Islamist fanatic, a jihadi, a mujj, who was in Benghazi. He was one of the people that Gaddafi would have relieved us of. But of course, back in March 2011, as Gaddafi was approaching Benghazi, we had NATO airstrikes urged on by Bernard-Henri Lévy, by Sarkozy, and then by Samantha Power and Susan Rice and the rest of these people, Michael McFaul. And they saved all of those crazies, those fanatics. And they then were, of course, transshipped under the supervision of Ambassador Stevens and others to Turkey, a country which is actually ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. And then they were shipped into northern Syria, and that same butcher, that same fighter, that same fanatic enemy of civilization, I must call him, who was fighting in Benghazi against Gaddafi, has then gone on to benefit from a few days in some nice Turkish hotels, was then transferred into Syria to fight against Assad, was defeated in Syria, and is now transmogrified into ISIS, which is now spreading in Iraq. This could be the same person. And nevertheless, the entire U.S. foreign policy, as articulated by a spokesperson like Andrea Mitchell, Mrs. Greenspan, Mrs. Federal Reserve, her argument is that if the U.S. had only bombed Syria last year, there would be no ISIS this year. No, this is a continuity. The same forces, the same people, in some cases the same equipment, the same officers, from Libya, anti-Gaddafi, to Syria, anti-Assad, winning in Libya, reducing the country to chaos and the collapse of civilization, into Syria, where they were defeated so far by the modern state, and now an attempt to do the same thing in Iraq. And then, of course, they'll move on. They'll try to move on to Iran. They'll try to move on to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, who knows, Lebanon. And then we've also got this problem with Hamas, which is really something similar. Now, there's also this contradiction. The U.S. intelligence apparatus works on its own. It's not there thanks to Obama. It's not the friend of Obama. Does Obama control it? Well, sometimes, but I think rarely. So the CIA does what it wants. We're noting the 40th anniversary of Nixon resigning during Watergate. What was that? Well, that was the CIA ousting a president in crude terms. You go back and look at the protagonists of Watergate, what will you find? Howard Hunt, the head of the plumbers, the dominant personality in any case, a classic, legendary Cold War CIA agent. And if that's not enough, then James McCord, a technical expert, right? CIA Office of Security. Watch out for them. General Gaynor. And then, of course, other people like Gordon Liddy of the FBI, Bob Woodward of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and so on down the line. The effect of Watergate, the goal of Watergate, is to weaken the presidency. And we're being told this week the U.S. presidency was decisively weakened through Watergate. Yeah, because if the intelligence spooks are allowed to oust a president, obviously taking advantage of Henry Kissinger and other nefarious individuals. But if the CIA can oust the president, well, then the CIA is more powerful than a president. Everybody remembers J. Edgar Hoover's ubiquitous files with all the dirt on every elected official. Well, that's the CIA has got that and more, because they have, much more what can we say, élan in terms of the active measures side of things. So we now get to a situation where the CIA and Saudis and NATO intelligence have created this ISIS. We remember who it is, right? ARM, Abdul Rahman, ARF, Abdul Rahman Faisal, right? Brother of Prince Turki, brother of Prince Faisal, the foreign minister. He's the patron, right? The British used to have, under the patronage of Her Majesty or Her Royal Highness or whatever. In this case, it's under the patronage of ARF, Abdul Rahman Faisal. So now we get a kind of this mass of contradictions. At the end of this, we've got this humanitarian emergency. Now, let's just stop here. The humanitarian emergency, is it real or is it a fraud? We remember Amanpour, for example, in Bosnia, saying, 100,000 Bosnians are going to be killed or have been killed. And, of course, this was a complete fraud. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is this story true? Are there really these Yazidis, this religious group of ancient faith, a very characteristic singular religion, but are they really on that mountain, and are they really going to die? And is it really 40,000 Yazidis and a total of 200,000 refugees whose lives are in danger at the hands of ISIS? Well, I obviously would be skeptical to begin with, but then here's what I would point to. Is there some institution that might compel at least a certain amount of attention? And I think there is. It's the Vatican under Pope Francis. And we'll get back to this in a second here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley, Washington, D.C. Take a look, as usual, at tarpley.net. And there I've had a fairly active week on various radio programs. Tom Kiley, Jeff Rentz, different commentaries. In particular, this issue of World War I. We don't have time to do too much more on World War I this week, but it will be going on, right? Because we're going into the phase of the Battle of Frontiers, right? That the The worst day of the French army in the entirety of World War I was, I believe, August 22nd, August 23rd, with about 27,000 casualties on a single day. And that matches the British losses at the Battle of the Somme in the summer of 1916. But take a look at that. And above all, the news is a new document which points to the role of George V in telling Earl Grey, Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey, telling Earl Grey, you've got to find a reason to get us into war. You must find a reason, Grey. And then, as if Grey needed it, pointing out, as soon as the Germans entered Belgium under the Schlieffen Plan, we'll talk about the Schlieffen Plan this month. This is the month 100 years ago when the Schlieffen Plan failed. Would have been better for civilization for the Schlieffen Plan to succeed. It would have ended this war in short order. That would have been better than any possible subsequent alternative. But despite our reservations about the German system, 25 million dead outweigh, and the catastrophe of civilization, communism, fascism, depression, World War II, Cold War, everything, right up to the present time. And these one-sided treaties, right? Versailles, Sèvres, Trianon, Saint-Germain, Neuilly, disasters for the world. And that's what we're living through in terms of Israel, Palestine. That's also what we're living through in terms of Syria, Iraq, and to some degree also Ukraine. So all of that you find on tarpley.net. And for your summer reading, I recommend, since Little Rand is running for president, if we have time, we'll talk about Little Rand skedaddling when the hot issue of comes up, and he's sitting with the reactionary racist. He's palling around with Steve King, that monster of racism, xenophobia, and reaction. And a dreamer comes up and says, why are you persecuting us? Little Rand runs. And that sums up the tremendous contradictions in Little Rand's effort to run for president based on no qualifications whatsoever. Weaker than Obama in that regard. Absolutely nothing to point to. Maybe his membership in the Nosy Brotherhood and his idolatry of Aqua Buddha back at Baylor. But we'll talk about this in coming weeks. So let's now look. Obama last night says the U.S. will do two things: bomb ISIS and make these humanitarian relief drops to the refugees on the mountain and elsewhere. Hollande of France is supporting. Actually, the French were out in front. Fabius, evil though he is, nevertheless, and this, again, contradictory, this mass of contradictions because of this policy that if you're a jihadi in Syria, you're a good guy, but if you're a jihadi in Iraq, you're a bad guy, and you don't cross the border because then you're going to be bombed. Many problems here. France, of course, traditionally the protector of the Christians in the Levant is France. That's several hundred years worth. Deep institutional forces, interest in Lebanon and stuff like that, going back to Sykes-Picot. But let's look a little bit further. Can we take this humanitarian situation seriously? In other words, is it for real? And I'm inclining to think, yes, we can, not because of anything Obama or NATO governments say, but because of the Pope taking it seriously, right? You want to look for a man of character, a person of character. Who could that be? Well, I think Pope Francis is such a person. Now, he has put out, essentially, Francis has done three things in the last week or two. The first I would point to that I'm aware of is on Sunday, I believe, in the Angelus in St. Peter's Square. He called attention to a humanitarian emergency emerging in northern Iraq. Then between Wednesday and Thursday, he put out a another warning, another attempt to call world attention to it, that many Iraqis, religious minorities, but he, of course, pays special attention to the Christians, are in grave danger in northern Iraq. And then Thursday, that is to say yesterday in my time frame, and that would be the 7th of August, he called on world governments to take measures to protect Christians driven from their villages in northern Iraq and provide them with humanitarian aid. So Francis says the world community should, quote, put an end to the humanitarian drama underway and adopt measures to protect those who are threatened by violence and assure them necessary aid, especially urgent for those who are homeless and depend on the solidarity of others. And he also refers to the fact that many of these Christian villages have been under Christianity for practically 2,000 years, right? We're talking the Chaldeans in particular, but also others, right? Assyrian Christians to be found there. Naturally, we're concerned with all groups, but the fact is these Christians are being subjected to special attention by the ISIS butchers. Now, there's also this. This is the news now this morning. Pope Francis is sending Cardinal Fernando Filoni, Filoni. Fernando Filoni is the former apostolic nuncio in Baghdad, Vatican ambassador to Iraq, and he's the head of the Congregation for the Evangelization of the Peoples. And I take it that's what used to be called the Vatican Congregation for the non-Christians and or the non-believers. But in this case, a cardinal sent to northern Iraq for humanitarian purposes. So I would say that indicates that there really is something going on. In other words, this is not a completely fabricated Amanpour special where it's wildly exaggerated, blown out of all proportion, right? And actually, that's a provisional estimate because it's very hard to get this from afar. All right. So what do we have? The ISIS is advancing, and they've gotten weapons from U.S. arms deposits, and we'll have to continue in our next segment. World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, and it's the 8th of August. We're coming up on Feria Augusta, the 15th of August, holiday under the Roman emperors, and then the Feast of the Ascension. All of southern Europe now shutting down. Portugal, Spain, southern France, really all of France, Italy, Bavaria, lots of places shutting down. But we're still on watch. So this bombing, right? The U.S. has apparently bombed a couple of artillery pieces that were being used to shell a city inhabited by the Kurds. Now, let's just try to get this straight because it is complex. I would say there are 3 blocks you can more or less identify. There's the Iran-Syria-Hezbollah block, and generally that's the better one. That's the one that needs to be stronger. Then you've got this other one, the Saudi-Egypt block. Maybe Jordan can be included. That I would think is a purely opportunistic block. In other words, the Saudis, in their feud with Qatar, have got to batten themselves onto some large power. Egypt is that. Sisi needs the Saudi money. I don't think he has any love for the Saudis. The Saudis need some big country. Well, Egypt is the biggest. So I think that's an opportunistic, that's an unprincipled combination, although our sympathy, as always, goes to the Nasserist or neo-Nasserist Sisi. And then you got this other block, Qatar, Turkey, Hamas, and the Israelis, strangely enough. In other words, it's complex, but maybe the Israelis would rather go with the Saudis. I don't know. But the fact is that there's a de facto convergence. If Qatar is destroying all the Arab nation states, then the Israelis are going to be happy with that. So it's it's complex. And I've got to stress this thing. The Qatar, Turkey, Hamas connection is for sure, right? Remember the new emir of Qatar went to Gaza. You notice in all of this stuff, if there's a real crisis in northern Iraq, in other words, if ISIS is really the end of the world, 2 months ago, the U.S. would have bombed ISIS. And if it were really the end of the world, the Turkish army, of course, could flatten ISIS. They might at the same time flatten the Kurds, which would be counterproductive. So this is again, it's a real mass of contradictions because of all the deceptions and all the sellouts and betrayals that are going on. So where is Turkey? Where is the great Erdogan? Where's the new Ottoman emperor? Well, he's got an election on Sunday. And he's, of course, happy if ISIS attacks the Kurds and the Peshmerga. He's very, very happy with that. But then again, it doesn't look coherent from the Western media narrative point of view. All right. So we also have the fact that the Kurds have apparently been defeated. There was boundless confidence in the Peshmerga, but now we're told the Peshmerga have been defeated because the ISIS have captured so much U.S. equipment that the Peshmerga are outgunned. That's now the media line on Peshmerga. At the same time, though, inside this Kurdish coalition, there are people saying the Peshmerga officers have to be put on trial. Now, that gets us back to this whole thing with ISIS. Does ISIS prevail because it's so good militarily, or are the generals and the officers on the other side bribed by Qatar in the same way the U.S. bribed the Iraqi army at various times? You get the picture. And I think that bribery part is quite plausible because it's Qatar, right? What do they have to work with? A lot of money. So I think that's actually happening. Now, where does all this go? I'm not sure. However, it seems to me that the NATO scenario was not to bomb ISIS, right? You see there's such reluctance by Obama. Why? Because, again, ISIS is a wonderful tool to continue the work that they began in Libya and have continued in Syria and would like to export elsewhere, the destruction of all the nation states. So I think it's unlikely that the bomb of ISIS will get very muscular. I don't think it's going to be a robust bombing campaign. It's a few things just for public relations. But still, the commitment of NATO, U.S., British, and the rest, was to force Maliki out and not to do anything against ISIS, screaming that it's the end of the world, but not lifting a finger until Maliki could be ousted because he's a Shiite, he's close to Iran, or at least he was, and then it gets even more complicated. I think this also throws some light on the tergiversations of Kerry concerning Israel-Palestine. That Kerry was trying to give Hamas a success. It's plausible, so that the Hamas, Qatar, Turkey axis would be stronger. I would also point in passing, there's a 9/11 revival coming from certain quarters, certain reactionary Republican congressmen are coming forward and saying that we have the famous 28 minutes on the Saudis from the joint congressional investigation of 9/11 from 2002, and that's going to blow the lid off the Saudis. And every opportunist is jumping on this. Former Senator Graham and Congressman Jones from North Carolina and such people. What's going on? I think the idea with that, and I think some people in Britain from the 9/11 truth community in Great Britain seem to have gotten the idea that it's an attempt to bash the Saudis, and it has something to do with the U.S. wanting to support Qatar and Turkey, and therefore Hamas, against the Saudis. And that's also perhaps why Brennan is getting slammed on this the snooping issue, right? Did the CIA snoop on the senators? Well, yeah, they did. He had denied it, so now they're getting him. So the idea is that the Saudi party, Brennan, of course, former CIA station chief in Riyadh, bound hand and foot to the Saudis, he's under attack. So the idea is to revive 9/11 in a very modest way in order to slam the Saudis' blood on them. And, of course, dear friends, that will not do. You got to get 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA, the 5th edition with the 46 drills and exercises. And you got to tell me, how did those Saudis, Prince Bandar, of course, a genius, but a superman of diplomacy and deception, but how could he set up the 46 drills over a period of even 15 or even more years to make this happen? It just doesn't work. It's made in USA. There's no competition. There's no question about it. So there we have it. Going further, right? National Pentagon Radio this morning, this woman who's named after a brand of beer, Labatt, says that the order created at Westphalia is going down. Maybe she let the cat out of the bag. The Westphalia order is that there are independent sovereign nation states, not empires. That's the state system. It's a state system, not an imperial system. And it's not as bad as the alternatives. Of course, I think she meant Versailles, the Sykes-Picot. Remember, we wouldn't know about the Sykes-Picot if Trotsky hadn't published all of this stuff in Pravda after the Bolshevik Revolution. But Sykes-Picot was then built into the Treaty of Sèvres, and that's the bad stuff. So there's an imperialist thing. But the status quo right now is what we need. What we need, of course, is a Marshall Plan. So here are the caveats that I would say. First of all, there must be no bombing of Syria, Iran. No bombing of Syria, Iran. And Qatar has to stop backing ISIS. We'll elaborate on this in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So let's see where this goes. But we don't need sloganeering, right? We've had commentators telling us today, when it comes to Obama, you can't take his statements at face value. Wow. Really? We practically fell out of our chairs, and that, imperialists are at work. Fine. But maybe there's something more complex going on. Anyway, this is not likely to become the hinge of world fate. But again, I think there is a real humanitarian crisis and genocide. There is this technical question. The Yazidis, if this is a separate population, the idea of exterminating them, which seems to be the word from ISIS, that would be genocide. The other question is the statement from the emir of the Islamic State, that is ISIS. He wants to put his flag on the White House. Well, let's not waste too much sleep over that. Although, there are Tamerlane phenomena in world history. Go take a look at that play by Christopher Marlowe, and you'll see how sometimes in a period of social breakdown, these anti-civilization movements can sometimes take off. So what I would say is what's happening now with ISIS is not the same as Libya. It's Libya in reverse. Libya was bombing an existing government in order to help a gang of anti-civilization fanatics. What we've got now is bombing some anti-civilization fanatics, or at least pretending to, and this might be of some help to existing governments. And this is the hallmark of the situation. In this period of total world social, economic, political breakdown, any government is a potential ally. Any government. Some obviously are, Qatar. I don't know. Is that a government? What is that? It's about 60 or 100,000 people with a lot of money who destabilize the world. Maybe that's an exception. But any government is at least a potential ally. And therefore the method is work with existing governments against anti-civilization fanatics of whatever stripe, whatever religion they call themselves, right? They can call themselves born again this or born again that. that's no good. Civilization is what we need. And, of course, we're now harvesting the bitter fruits of the Arab Spring, right? The golden youth are long gone. The Islamists are getting battered. And what comes forward now is ethnic and, warlordism, right? Because that's what this ISIS actually is. So we'll be looking for Cardinal Filoni to say something. No bombing of Syria, Iran. Qatar, and indeed Saudi individuals and UAE individuals, right, where United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, all those people, back off, stop supporting ISIS, because without that money, ISIS could not exist. Where is Turkey, right? Turkey, close your border to the crazies, and you can cut off the supply line to those people. Similarly for Lebanon. And this Maliki, right? Stop the vendetta against Maliki. We were told, the Iraqi army ran away, and that's Maliki's fault. Well, now the Peshmerga of the Kurds have run away. You're going to blame Maliki for that too? I don't think so. They're not loyal to Maliki in any sense. Now, the Ukrainian situation. There are some indications that Russian action may be imminent. This has to do with, I think, with the seasons. If you're going to do anything militarily, August, September is essentially your window, and after that, the rains come and then the cold. So let's watch it. I wouldn't join in the hysteria, but it's possible. In other words, there is a humanitarian emergency. Lugansk and Donetsk are being savagely bombed and strafed and bombarded with artillery. That's a humanitarian emergency. And there might be a parallelism between the U.S. bombing ISIS and Putin acting to protect the populations of these places. We're going to support Putin on that without wanting to join the chorus of people telling him that he has to do it, otherwise he'll be discredited. I don't think he will be. You got to pick your quarrels carefully. The Russian economy under heavy attack. Remember, sanctions are economic warfare. We're told by Obama that there's been 100 billion to 200 billion of flight capital out of Russia. The Russian markets are down by about 1/5. The ruble under heavy pressure. Now, the answer to that, as I say, should be the full Glaziev capital controls and exchange controls of the Malaysian type, right? The reason the imperialist vendetta against Malaysia goes back to Mahathir Mohamad, one of our favorite people, and his capital controls, exchange controls against the infamous Asian contagion of 1998, which was actually a dollar crisis. If you want to protect your currency, capital controls, exchange controls, you've got to then weigh the possibility of going the Argentine route, a debt moratorium or repudiation of all debts owed to London and New York. You've got to think about divesting your treasury bonds, your investments in imperialist governments. The most important, get control of the Russian central bank and start issuing 0% or very low interest long-term credit for internal use, for infrastructure, industry, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, oil extraction, pipeline building, and so forth. And we're being told now that there is a credit crunch inside Russia. Well, if there's a credit crunch inside Russia, the full Glaziev, start activating the BRICS Bank, go into some place like Egypt and begin building a second Nile, start that Cairo to Cape Town high-speed rail link, start your water projects on the Upper Nile, and building lock system if needed, so that you can get the Nile Congo working as an inland waterway. Dakar, Djibouti to follow, right? Go into all of those countries. Notice that Obama had a meeting with the African leaders this week, and he's got essentially nothing, right? It's just the empty words. Inside Ukraine government is splintering. Ukraine government is in big trouble. Part of it is that they're pushing IMF shock therapy. Back in 1991-92, Ukraine had not gone through anything near as severe as the Gaidar and Chubais looting, smashing up of the post-Soviet economy. So the Ukrainians are now learning what IMF shock therapy feels like, and they don't like it. Yatsenyuk is living on, right? His resignation attempted but didn't go through. The Communist Party banned. The coalition splintering. We've got lunatics in the Ukraine government who want to already start blocking the gas transit, Russian gas for Europe. They want to cut it off. So that's a disaster. So we're urging the Russian government. Food sanctions are, I guess, understandable. Food sanctions essentially mean we may be under total economic blockade, and we've got to begin to wean people off these probably more expensive kinds of foreign food, right? But that's apparently a quarter of the Russian food market, at least in the major cities. So import substitution is understandable as an emergency war measure, in effect. If you want to have a war economy, then you've got to cut off food imports of that luxury food type or upscale amenity food types and concentrate on the basics. But import substitution as an economic strategy is a failure. Raoul Prebisch, a failure. The way to develop your economy is export substitution. Start exporting. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Now, we've done the ISIS question. We've had at least a few insights into the Ukraine-Russia situation, European Union. We will talk a little bit about Israel, Palestine, Gaza in a minute, but let's now go to our vast panorama of struggle. And first stop is going to be Lincoln, Nebraska. We want to talk to Dan Burdorf. Dan Burdorf is, of course, candidate for United States Senate in Nebraska. He's going up against the Republican Ben Sass, who is a very dubious and shadowy figure with a very checkered career. Also against the Democratic wheelhorse Domina. And let's hear from Dan Burdorf. Dan, what's the state of your race?
Hey, Webster, thank you very much for having me. I really
always
appreciate
a pleasure.
being on your program.
We want you every week, all the way to November.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Last week, Friday, October 1st, my team and I turned in nearly 5,700 ballot signatures from registered voters representing 69 Nebraska counties out of 93 counties here in the state from every corner of Nebraska. And this is a great accomplishment on a shoestring budget like ours. So we're currently waiting to hear if ballot access will be granted. We may know the results sometime next week. And in the meantime, we're continuing with our campaign to fight against Wall Street speculators. We've been invited to the Nebraska Cattlemen's Senate debate at the Nebraska State Fair on August 25th, and we're preparing for that. So we're hopeful, optimistic, and we're pushing ahead. The purpose of my campaign, Webster, is to represent the people of Nebraska with concrete demands for economic reform, not just a 1% Wall Street sales tax, but imagine a complete program of economic protections and reforms based on the proud tradition of Hamilton, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and, of course, Nebraska's own Populist Party. And I ask listeners to read this program, if I may, at danfornebraska.com. And if I could just take just a second, Webster, I have to thank my volunteers, especially the great staff that's been working with me, because they believe in this platform. I want to thank my media manager, Polly Hughes. I want to thank my volunteer petitioners, especially Joe Johnson, who's been with me from the beginning, Thomas Mars, who's been a workhorse in western Nebraska for us, Daniela Walsh from the Tax Wall Street Party, Brian Walsh, Danny Sullivan, and a special thank you, to James Walsh, who came out and went above and beyond with his logistical support in Grand Island and western Nebraska. And I also feel a lot of gratitude to the many people that took the time in Nebraska to listen to my platform and support my candidacy.
Dan, you've gotten a flurry of media attention this past couple of days. Tell us all about that in some detail.
Well, sure. I have. I've been on the radio. Had a long radio interview on KFOR Lincoln 1240 here in Lincoln, Nebraska. We had a press conference. One of the outstanding visitors to the press conference was the AP reporter. So we're looking forward to an AP report soon. We've had coverage again in KFOR. We've had coverage in the Lincoln Journal-Star. You can find that by Googling my name, Dan Burdorf, and the Senate race and those particular media outlets. And we're getting more coverage from the local media coming up. And I think it's because America wants an economic program like mine. I offer a fighting program to rebuild America. And history shows that this program works. And after listening to Nebraskans for an entire summer campaigning in the hot sun, I know people are hungry for this program, and I know firsthand that this program has the appeal to win national elections. And I think that's why I'm getting the media coverage I'm getting now. And we have the program to restore full employment, world-class industries and infrastructure, thriving family farms, and a rising standard of living. So if you can imagine what that would look like, please visit my webpage, danfornebraska.com, to learn more about it. Because my opponents don't offer a program. They're just offering wedge issues. And I heard you earlier mention Ben Sass. Ben Sass has been anointed for this Senate seat by the national media, and he hides behind Nebraska family values to obscure what he has planned, which is the brutal reactionary program of Wall Street speculators and Washington networks, to which he owes his entire elite career, his entire elite insider career, and the biggest war chest ever known in Nebraska history. None of my opponents come close to our platform. Ben Sass has no projects of great infrastructure like Lincoln's Continental Railroad. I do. He has no protective tariff that historically has helped America become an industrial superpower. I do. None of my opponents talk about a national bank to finance rapid reindustrialization without the interest demanded by Wall Street banks. But I do, Webster. And no one in this campaign is talking about a plan to make higher education, like the one Mr. Sass enjoyed at America and England's most elite private universities, affordable or free. I have it in my platform. No one else does. And you can find my plans at Dan for Nebraska. So danfornebraska.com. And if you imagine a platform that addresses these concerns, that's what I'm offering. And I need your support to keep fighting and to get this program out to the good people of Nebraska and around the country. There's still a lot we must fight against, too.
Dan, I think you're the right man in the right place at the right time. We just have a Wall Street Journal NBC poll. Congress is more unpopular even than Wall Street. Well, I guess because the Congress does the dirty work for Wall Street.
Sure.
And we've also got another poll that not only do Americans have a negative feeling about Congress in general, but now, as something of a novelty, the individual members of the House and the Senate are held in contempt because of what they've done. And Sass is obviously going to slip seamlessly into that. A Tea Party elitist. The Tea Party by way of what? Oxford, Yale?
I believe, yes, Oxford, Yale, and Harvard, St. John's. I think those are some of the few.
A real good old boy.
Yeah, a real down-home Nebraskan. But there's, like I said, there's a lot we have to fight against, Webster, and Mr. Sass has displayed not only this elitism and an insider background, like we said before previously, but he's also displayed a naive aggression towards Russia and Iran. And I think, I'm sure you're covering this in your program this week with Russia and Iran. Mr. Sass promises, quoting from his website, he promises, quote, overwhelming force to decimate our enemies. And he even suggests anti-Russian missiles in Ukraine. So the Republicans have not learned anything from the failures of chicken hawk neoconservatives. And Russia has very real nuclear weapons and has not been threatening to the American people. Mr. Sass should know that a candidate should never advocate policy that would lead to thermonuclear war. Nebraskans don't want to risk the worst when we can have the best. And Nebraskans want the next New Deal. They don't want endless wars. They don't want budget cuts. They don't want bailouts. They don't want free trade. They don't want economic misery. And they don't want the control of Wall Street over our economy. So, like the rest of America, Nebraskans are caught between a rock and a hard place when it comes to these two parties. The Nebraska Democratic Party, as you know, Webster, sent Ben Nelson to the Gang of 14 for years to push through reactionary justices like Roberts and Alito. And Nebraska's wanted prudent, conservative jurists, but what we got from the Nebraska Democratic Party was Citizens United, Hobby Lobby, and any other future damage awaiting our Constitution that comes from the Supreme Court. And we need a senator who will hold a nominee's feet to the fire. I'm going to be that senator. So
absolutely, this is judicial activism from people who promised to respect tradition and precedent, and instead we've got wild right-wing radicalism. And of course, on that warmonger stuff, he's out of touch with Nebraska, right, which is one of the states least interested in foreign adventures.
I believe that's true.
Two more seconds. It's danfornebraska.com. Dan for Nebraska, and we'll see you next week, Dan.
Well, thank you very much.
Good luck on that ballot status.
So far. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Back next week, and we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we've talked about the situation there with ISIS. Let's see what comes out of that. But we need actual analysis, insight, not just vulgar sloganeering. And then with the Ukraine situation, notice Russia reaching out to Iran for various kinds of economic cooperation. Russia is not isolated, despite the lunatic assertions of the State Department and Kerry. And instead, there is a block of states now emerging. The problem is they have got to offer an alternative to the Anglo-American finance system. This is not so much a matter of ideology in the old sense. In other words, you don't need some sort of global synthetic ideology, dialectical materialism, something like this. That will not do. But what you need is a different kind of economics. And again, the kind that you need, you can call it the German system with Friedrich List. You can call it the American system with Henry Carey, Hamilton, people like this. You can call it the French system. It goes back to Jean-Baptiste Colbert. You can call it the MITI, Ministry for International Trade and Industry of Japan. You can call it the Taiwan experience. A lot of that has been taken over by the Beijing government, but you do get the idea. Maybe it's the Medici system, industrial development through textile manufacturing, back in the Trecento, Quattrocento, the 1300s and the 1400s. But this is the idea. That's the kind of global alternative that we need. So there has to be a greater sense of urgency on that front. And again, import substitution, understandable as a war measure under duress. You have to simply cut off various kinds of imports. You got to use your foreign exchange very, very carefully. Use it to meet your overriding military needs. But the way to counterattack the Anglo-Americans when they become rambunctious is to attack them on the plane of finance, because this is where they dominate the world. And of course, once you talk about that, you've then got oligarchs and other powerful interest groups. You've got Medvedev, you've got Kudrin, you've got Gref, you've got Nabiullina, I'm pretty sure, who are not going to be interested in that. And there may also be problems with China. But this is exactly where statesmanship has to come in. And it's possible also to take a somewhat longer view and wait for the Anglo-Americans to attack more, so that they are going to be viewed worldwide as the absolute aggressor if you have to do something that's going to cause, frankly, a worldwide dollar panic. The dollar is much more vulnerable than the ruble, at least under current management. So there we have it. The the military campaigning season imposes its own objective timetable. And if there is going to be a military campaign, it would have to start in the next month or so, I would think. If the Ukrainians go ahead and block the gas transfer to Europe, then they will put themselves very much in the wrong. Now, concerning Israel, Palestine, Gaza, my critique of Hamas, I'm afraid, has to come to the fore. We've just had this experience of Hamas breaking the ceasefire. So the military wing of Hamas, the extremists, in other words, people whose mental home, whose political home is very much the Libyan jihadis, the Syrian jihadis, the ISIS. That's Hamas, right, with the Muslim Brotherhood in the background, Qatar providing the money. So Hamas has started shooting. This shows incompetent and destructive political leadership, reckless and irresponsible, incalculable folly, I would say. Remember, Israel has always wanted Hamas. Israel was always uncomfortable dealing with the moderate Fatah, Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Arafat people, his heirs, Abu Mazen, the Erekats, and Hanan Ashrawi, and so forth. It's easier to deal with Hamas. They've always wanted Hamas. And the ability of Hamas to pull that coup d'etat after the election, the evidence seems to be coming in that the Israelis actually favored the coup d'etat by Hamas, which they could have stopped, but they didn't. And then perhaps they also helped it along. We have to go back and look at this question of this kind of ideology, Islamism as a political ideology. If we go back to the Cold War, let's go back to the 1950s and 60s, when the U.S. did not have a totally free hand, and when the British did not have a totally free hand, because they were locked in a Cold War with the Soviets, there was, under the banner of the non-aligned movement and the anti-colonial movement of those years, which were more hopeful than what we've seen so far lately, there was a tendency of the countries in the Middle East, the Arab Muslim countries, to throw off the colonial yoke and choose what? Not to choose religious governments, but to choose governments that were anti-colonial, pro-development, big projects, read Aswan High Dam and things like this. They were secular, they were probably military, they were modernizing, and they were populist, and that's Nasser of Egypt, General Qassem of Iraq. U.S. played Saddam against Qassem. Assad's in Syria, Gaddafi of Libya, very much a disciple of Nasser. Similar things in Algeria, Arafat in the PLO, and so forth. Mossadegh in Iran is something similar, a little bit different, more advanced society perhaps. But avant la lettre, he's also essentially secular, anti-colonial, modernizing, populist, and so forth. It's only when the U.S. becomes the only game in town that we get these Islamist movements funded by Saudi Arabia. Remember, Saudi Arabia was the sworn enemy of Nasser, right? The voice of the Arabs from Cairo spent a lot of time attacking Saudi Arabia, among other things because they had slavery legal until 1965. So you can't blame the Arab world for the excesses of ISIS. ISIS and similar things are growths that have been fostered by imperialism from the outside. Hamas, a case in point, founded by General Sharon. Sharon of Israel made it possible for them to grow. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now we've heard from some of our struggle situations. Let's now go to New York State. We heard some very interesting news last week from Randy Credico running for governor of New York. And the news this week is that Zephyr Teachout, the official of the Soros Open Society Foundation on the advisory board. She's now under attack from the Wall Street puppet Andrew Cuomo. Cuomo trying to throw her off the ballot because of her residency problems. Is Zephyr Teachout a carpetbagger, I guess, is one of the questions that comes up. But let's go right to the heart of the matter. Let's get it from the protagonist, the one guaranteed opponent on the Democratic primary ballot of September 9th, I believe, and that's Randy Credico. So welcome, Randy. What's the state of your race?
Hey, great to be on the show, Webster. Thank you for having me on. Well, we're out there pushing pretty hard. I'm down in the village. I just did an interview with Bob Goldthwait, the comedian. And I was at the trial this morning for Zephyr Teachout on her ballot status. Clearly, it doesn't look good for her, but I don't know which way the judge will rule. You know, the judiciary in the state of New York is so corrupt that, you know, they're all, like, appointed and they're all looking to move up. None of them are voted in. 90% are just, like, appointed to the Court of Claims, and then they get move up. It's a sinecure gig. And so I don't know which way this judge will go. They presented a pretty strong case against her, but I don't know. You know, I don't know if I should be rooting for her to be knocked off and let me have a one-on-one, or if I should be rooting for the democratic process. But clearly she spent a lot of time in Vermont over the last 5 years.
All right, Randy. I guess we can leave that to these corrupt judges. I was just saying. Go ahead, Randy.
What'd you say?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's the question?
I think we should just back off on that and see what happens with her, right? Because we can't influence that one way or the other.
I'm not going to weigh in on it. Whatever happens, happens. And, you know, there's a shot that it'd be a one-on-one with Andrew Cuomo, and clearly I have positions that are, the antithesis of his positions. He's a Wall Street corporate bagman up there. He's very close with Alphonse D'Amato, who that corrupt senator who's controlled by the oil and gas industry and other big corporate clients, Wall Street, very close to Wall Street, as is his successor, is Charles Schumer. But, you know, he bundled more money for Andrew Cuomo than any other person. If you look at his recent filings, 90% of the money raised in the recent quarter was through Alphonse D'Amato, and the people he represents are all bad people.
Absolutely. Now, look, the one accusation I'd give you a chance to refute this is the Daily Snooze. Okay, the New York Daily News says that you are part of a plot by Cuomo. That the fact that you're going to be on a primary ballot means that he will have a primary election campaign, and therefore he can raise more money than if he only had the general election campaign. And my answer to that would be, yeah, watch out, though. Credico has the Wall Street sales tax and various ideas whose time has come. So maybe Cuomo is going to outsmart himself, right? He's going to play a trick so clever that he tricks himself.
I think so. I think, I'm doing retail politics. I'm out on the street. And no matter where I go, people don't like Cuomo. They like the idea of a Wall Street sales tax to underwrite the economy for those who have been left out of it. You know, free subway and bus fares, Medicare for all, and creating, a real jobs program, which is what the state needs. And we could raise that through just a minuscule Wall Street sales tax. If they were to be patriotic and chip in, instead of just making money off of wars and, hey, Gus, how are you? Where are you going? So I just somebody on the street that I haven't seen who's a supporter of my campaign just walked by. I'm in the West Village right now, and I'm shaking hands. I'm passing out flyers. Nobody likes Andrew Cuomo here, but they do love the Wall Street sales tax as a vehicle to really kickstart the economy statewide as a model for a national model out of this state, which I am promoting.
So the idea is don't just badmouth Wall Street, don't just diss them, but hit them hard, make them pay, and get some resources out of that could be actually used for economic development. It's a sure winner.
Right. Well, listen, I was just in Brooklyn. I went to the Brooklyn Supreme Court, and there's like 9 banks on the same street, and they all look like the Taj Mahal. You got Bank of America, you got the Citibank, you got TD Bank, Chase. They take up a whole street in the downtown area, and these resplendent, beautiful buildings. And that's all you see right now, cropping up all over the city are, these banks, outlets. And so they're doing very well. They've done very well under Andrew Cuomo. It's been he repealed the bank tax, and so they're not paying anything. Everyone else, the property tax is very high here. Small business going under. These huge sporting franchises, the Mets and the Yankees and the others, the Nets, they don't pay a tax. It's called 421A. They don't pay a tax. 421A means that if you say you're going to build some affordable housing, you don't have to pay any tax. You don't have to pay any business tax. And you've got the owners of of Madison Square Garden not paying any taxes. But a guy who's got like a hot dog stand has to pay a tax, a higher rate than all of these huge corporations.
I would also call your attention, Randy, the case of Bank of America, which includes the former Countrywide, right? Countrywide with Angelo Mozillo. Remember, he was giving cheap mortgages to corrupt members of Congress, but then real horrendous abuses, foreclosing on people's homes, right? Throwing them out on the street, even though there was no legal basis to do it. Now they're going to get off with a fine, but none of them are going to go to jail. This is now the biggest settlement in history now in the past day or two. They're going to have to pay a fine, but this doesn't help the people who were thrown out on the street. And again, the only way you're going to hit these people, really, realistically, is the 1% Wall Street sales tax. They're going to get fined $16 billion, but that's on $250 billion of bad mortgages that these people wrote. So
right. So definitely that will come to an end if I can miraculously pull this off September 9th. But in the meantime, we can force the issue. We can bring it out there and talk about it. I need support. I need people who will participate in giving out flyers, going door to door. Your listeners have been very, very helpful to this campaign. Last night, I was in a criminal justice debate at the Ethical Culture Society, and I blew the crowd away. And, of course, there were 5 people who listened to your show who were there. So,
wonderful.
And who helped out, and they
tell us your website quickly. It's Creditcode2014.com. Creditcode2014.com.
Creditcode 2014. I'm on the ballot. This is a great opportunity to promote that one big issue that you have been behind for a long period of time.
Okay. See you next week, Randy. We're already at our last segment here on World Crisis Radio. I just want to point you to one thing. The Benghazi cover-up, there is a Benghazi cover-up, and it's to deny that there was any deliberate wrongdoing. The laws were violated, and we now get the number 2 Democrat on that House Intelligence Committee, Mike Thompson of the Napa Sonoma wine country, comes out to tell the San Francisco Chronicle that there was no wrongdoing, no stand-down order, but there was, by Petraeus, that there was arms trafficking and jihadi trafficking going to Turkey. That's why Ambassador Stevens met the Turkish consul. There was hanky-panky going on with Kumu and Ansar and the Martyrs Brigade. So Mike Thompson on the House Intelligence Community. What are you up to, Mike? But now, got to wrap up our panorama of struggle. Wouldn't be complete without Benton Harbor, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and our good friend, Reverend Edward Pinckney, who is fighting it out on this line if it takes all summer. So, Reverend, what's the state of the struggle there where you are?
Well, sir, I tell you, I have so much news to tell you that it would take me 3 days to tell you everything. I mean, since last Friday, you would never believe what happened. I'll start with we was in court all day yesterday talking about the election. They're trying to figure out a way how they can say the election will not take place ever. And so far, they're failing. We went into the courtroom.
What election specifically are we talking about?
This is the recall of the mayor, James Hightower.
Okay.
And the petitions. The petitions is so important. But I got so much to say that I don't know how much time you're going to give me to say all this stuff.
We got to the end of the segment, and then we're done.
Okay, all right. So that's about 10 minutes.
Well, it's more like 8 minutes now.
Okay, 8 minutes, good. Well, let me get to the story then. Here's what happened. They crossed out close to 100 good signatures, saying that they was invalid, and they was valid. Also, double signatures, which is crucial. You only cross out the last one, but they crossed both of them out, saying that they was no good. On their website, it says if you sign twice, you cross out the very last one.
Mm-hmm.
They could not believe that we had came up with it. Then we talked about all the good signatures that we had. And they brought in the forensic guy that said that there was 20 signatures that was bad, and we counted close to 100 that was good, that they had crossed out. But even worse than this, the clerk, the county clerk, took the petitions and gave them to the sheriff's department, which was illegal. It says yesterday, she broke the law, the Michigan compiled law 750-491 and 2. You cannot take those petitions out of the office without a court order or a subpoena from the judge. You cannot do it. So the attorney told them that the sheriff department, that the clerk's office, and even the judge all had dirty hands. He said, all y'all hands is dirty because y'all targeted Reverend Pinckney, and you want to send Reverend Pinckney to jail. That's what you want to do. Oh, it was just a tremendous day for the people, because on every turn we won the battle. We showed them what we can do if we take a stand, and this is for people all over the world. We need people to take a stand and stand up. We need more people talking about Benton Harbor and what's going on here. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Well, sir, I tell you, we had such a great day yesterday in court that I'm so excited. You can tell probably by my voice that I am so excited what happened, because usually you can't go in the courthouse, in their house, and beat them down like we did yesterday. It was so tremendous, I tell you. I'm feeling the goosebumps all over myself. Just talking about it was such a tremendous victory for the people. But the people have to take a stand. People still don't get it. Yeah.
All right, Reverend, let me just to remind everybody now, this is Mayor Hightower is a puppet of Whirlpool Corporation. He's been imposed under this emergency management scheme of Governor Snyder, the reactionary governor of Michigan, and this is an attempt to have a special election to recall him, to kick him out as mayor. Whirlpool, of course, meaning Wall Street, the Wall Street investors who own Whirlpool. So Reverend Pinckney is out there fighting that battle, and he deserves your support. Reverend, how do people get in touch with you again, quickly?
You can call me at 269-925-0001. That's 269-925-0001. You can go to my website and donate. You can go to BHBanco, BANCO.org. That's BANCO.org, Banco, and you can donate there. And also, I want people to spread the word about what's going on in the city of Benton Harbor. is worse than you think, and is coming to your city next if you don't get out here and do something. The people have to take a stand. We have to learn to fight together. And this is something we can do. We can win this battle because there's more of us than them. So let's fight together and win this battle.
And then where does that case go? What's the next step on that front?
The next step, we'll go Tuesday, whether there's going to be an election in November to recall the mayor or not. That's Tuesday. We'll know for sure whether there's going to be an election November the 4th for the recall of the mayor of Benton Harbor, Michigan. And the puppets and the corporations are fighting to make sure that we do not have that election.
That's there it all is in a nutshell, right? The drama. Wall Street says we rule, and they're willing to destroy democracy and due process and the rule of law along the way.
Yeah, they're willing
instructive.
to do anything. And they're even willing to kill if necessary.
Okay, now you're also in touch with Detroit. How are we doing in Detroit? People still
we're doing great in Detroit, but here's the problem: Canada came down with some water for the residents of Detroit. And matter of fact, what we do now, we got them in on what we call a stalemate. We have stopped them from cutting off people's water. And also with Michigan Welfare Rights, you might know a little bit about them. They're setting up a place where people can come if they get their water cut off or before they get their water come out, and they can help them financially. Michigan Welfare Rights is a partnership with Banco. We're friends. We're good friends. We work together and do things together. I'm going to be in Detroit September the 8th. I believe it's the 8th, and speaking on behalf of some of the things that they need to do and how we're going to work together to make this thing happen. Tomorrow, I'm going to be in Kalamazoo, Michigan, speaking at this army at 319 Trumbull. 319 Trumbull. I'll be in Kalamazoo tomorrow. I'll be there from 2 to 6.
Okay, now that's actually Saturday the 9th of August, right?
No. It's Saturday, September the 8th. It's a Monday. I'm going to be speaking
but then
Detroit.
Kalamazoo, you say tomorrow in Kalamazoo.
Tomorrow in Kalamazoo, so the 9th.
That's going to be the 9th of August, right? This month.
That is correct. And I'll be there I'm going to be there from 2 to 6:30 or 2 to 6 or until it gets too dark.
Okay. And again, the group sponsoring that, 319 Trumbull?
Yeah, the 319 Trumbull. That's the address of the location I'll be speaking at.
Okay. In Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's a kind of a banking center in its own right, isn't it, if I recall?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Reverend Pinckney, we'll keep in touch. Good luck in Kalamazoo.
Listen, next week I'll let you know whether the election's going to go on or not.
All right. We'll be back next week with Reverend Pinckney. And unfortunately, we had a lot to talk about. The Mobile Bay anniversary has just gone by. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. Always a good motto. Thank you, Farragut and the Crater, the brave forces and the black troops who fought at the Crater to end slavery. But now slavery coming back in through the back door. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.